But we do want to turn to our first story, which is the political prisoner, the Palestinian political prisoner Walid Daqqa recently passed away inside of Israeli prisons, despite the fact that his sentence was already up. So, not only in and of itself a tragic event, but very indicative of the reality for the political prisoners of Palestine. And we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Basil Farraj, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. Basil, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Eugene. Thanks, Rania. Good to be back.
Well, it's really an honor to have you here with us. And, obviously it's a terrible thing that has taken place. Maybe for those who haven't seen anything about it, tell us something about Walid Daqqa and his situation and his death in Israeli custody.
Yeah, it's definitely a tragic loss. We are still mourning his loss. A figure like Walid Daqqa, who has been held in Israeli captivity since 1986. Actually, he really liked to write about his time in captivity. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start by reading something he wrote that marked his 25th year in captivity. So this was written in 2011. It's titled, "I Write to a Child Yet Unborn," and I'll get into this in a bit. He writes, "Today I finish my 25th year in prison, 9,131 days. This is a number that does not end. This is my prison age that has not stopped. I have turned 50 years old, and my life has been equally divided between prison and life outside prison. I write to a child yet unborn. I write to an idea or a dream that intentionally or unintentionally frightens the jailer, even before becoming a reality. I write to any child. I write to my child that has not been born yet. I write to the birth, milad, of the future. This is how we want to name our child, and this is exactly how I would like the future to remember us. Will I stop dreaming? I'll continue to dream despite this cruel reality. I'll search for a meaning for life despite what I have already lost. They dig ancestors' cemeteries searching for a delusional authenticity, while we search for a better future for our grandchildren, one certain to come. Salam Milad, which is the name of his daughter, who was born through conceived smuggled sperm. Salam, my dear." So Walid Daqqa, he was born in 1961 in a Palestinian town called Baqa al-Gharbiyya, which was conquered by Israel in 1948. He was arrested in 1986. He was charged with kidnapping an Israeli soldier, a charge he always continuously denied. Yet one of the military courts in also a Palestinian-occupied town called Lid charged him to life imprisonment, which was later reduced to 37 years in captivity. Later on, another court added 2 years to his sentence for the charge or accusing him that he had participated in smuggling cell phones to Palestinian prisoners. And here we know that Israel, not only since the beginning of this war, but since its inception in 1948, it has been maltreating Palestinian prisoners, subjecting them to torture, violence, denying them any form of communication with their families. And most importantly, I think, which is the reason why Walid Daqqa died, is this systematic medical negligence policy, which I think we could even refer to it as medical denial. Since the war began, Walid Daqqa was denied any form of medication, any form of medical visits. He was transported to Israeli hospitals, shackled, beaten, provided with insufficient quantities of food. In 2022, he was diagnosed with very rare bone marrow cancer. Israeli doctors did say that he would be dying, but the Israeli prison authority and the Israeli government denied his release. He was actually sick since 2015 with different forms of cancer. He would be submitting petitions for early release, but the Israeli government would continuously deny his release, saying that he poses a threat to the security of the Israeli state and to its public order. Now, I think this tragic loss, we are still mourning, of course, Walid Daqqa's death. He's not the only one. Since the war began on October 7th, at least 15 Palestinian prisoners were killed. This is the confirmed number we have. Israel has also said that they have, in one of their newspapers, Haaretz, they reported that 27 Palestinian prisoners have been also killed in a military camp that was created specifically for Gazan prisoners. So we're talking about dozens of Palestinian prisoners who were killed inside Israeli prisons. But of course, this policy is not simply the killing and assassination of Palestinian prisoners, but it's also the cruel policy of withholding their corpses. We are talking about Walid Daqqa was killed on the 7th of April. The Israeli authorities continue to refuse to release his body to his family. And here, it might be important to say that in every stage of his captivity, and I have the number for you just to show the listeners the extent to which he was incarcerated. He was imprisoned for a total of 13,893 days. 38 years in captivity. He forced the Israeli authorities to marry the woman he loved in 1999. He actually forced them to hold the wedding inside Ascalon prison. He smuggled sperm in 2019, and they conceived of their first child, their only child, whom he wrote the letter to. The letter I read parts of. He named her Milad, which means in Arabic the birth, or also the future. He was a prolific writer, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a bit. Prolific writer, an activist. He analyzed in quite prolific fashion the way in which Israeli carceral practices have been used against Palestinians, the way we should hold on to hope, but not simply for holding on to hope, but also for resisting. I think he warned us that worse days are coming. He kept fighting. And unfortunately, he died. I'm pretty sure his family was hoping that he would be released through the exchange agreements that might be happening. It's a tragic, painful news for all of us. In addition, of course, to the death of other Palestinian prisoners and the conditions that they continue to linger under. I mean, his death should be a bell, a warning that other Palestinian prisoners are also facing similar dire circumstances and medical negligence and insufficient quantities of food.
Basil, what you described sounds horrible in and of itself. And, I think I saw it reported that the Israelis are even saying they're not going to release Walid's body until 2025 when his sentence would have been up. Just really grotesque behavior to be expected from a colonial entity. That being said, we know that Palestinians in Israeli prisons suffer tremendously in so many ways, but it appears that torturous suffering that they're subjected to has worsened pretty dramatically since October 7th, as like a vengeful like retribution / I guess enjoyment of torturing Palestinians that we see Israelis be consumed by at the moment. And I mean, there was a recent report that even CNN put out because it was just so horrific, where it's become routine. They use the term routine amputations in one of the prisons they had set up for those they're basically imprisoning as hostages since October 7th. So can you maybe explain or lay out to us, obviously Palestinians suffer from these horrific prison conditions. What has worsened since October 7th?
Yes, Rani. So you're right. I mean, first of all, Israel continues to practice this policy of holding captive dead Palestinian bodies. It's not only specific to Palestinian prisoners, but also to other Palestinians who die while being shot by Israeli soldiers. So we're talking about hundreds of bodies that are being held as we speak in what Israel refers to as cemeteries of numbers or refrigerators at the National Institute for Forensic Institute. Now, how did the conditions change? You're absolutely right. I mean, since October 7th, and we have to understand that this is not new. I mean, the entire carceral regime, the entire prison regime has been set up to function this way. It has been set up to racialize, to brutalize, to torture Palestinian prisoners. One of the Palestinian prisoners who died was killed while being force-fed in 1980, Anis Dowleh, and another prisoner, Khadr Adnan, in May 2023. Both of their bodies are being held. But also we have to point out that since the war began, indeed, Israel has, in a sense, I mean, we do know that this is the logic through which the settler regime functions, but they have taken all gloves off. I mean, and this is not to say that they did have any forms of gloves, but they did shed kind of this kind of democratic face that they never had. And effectively, they have turned the plight of Palestinian prisoners into a total hell. I mean, this is not only the case of Walid Daqqa, who basically was killed because of the way in which he was treated. I mean, imagine a person who has a very chronic disease being labeled as a security threat to a state that owns nuclear weapons. I mean, it's insane. But at the same time, this is how this carceral regime functions. This is how the state functions. They want to impose these and to practice these torture methods to take us to break our spirits, to dissuade us from resisting engaging in resistance practices. And I have to say, this is something that Walid Daqqa has continuously warned us about. He wrote in 2010, he wrote an important text, and I urge your audience to read it. It's in English and in Arabic. It's titled in English, Consciousness Molded. through which he discusses the ways in which Israel uses torture to dissuade Palestinians from engaging in resistance practices, to break their spirits. And I have to say that Israel uses torture now for the similar purpose. I mean, you are quite right. Amputation of the legs, of arms. I mean, handcuffing Palestinians and leaving them handcuffed 24/7. This is not just a fascist and Nazi way of treating prisoners. It's also, I think, pointing to the core of this regime, which is intent to eliminate Palestinians from this land, to prevent them from engaging in resistance practices, and to tell them quite outright that if you dare to resist the occupation, this is your fate. I mean, the stories we hear now from prisoners is similarly a story of withdrawal of electricity, of water. Prisoners, we have not spoken to prisoners since October 7th. Just to, many of the families that have prisoners have not spoken to their loved ones for the past 6 months. We are talking about a systematic medical negligence, a systematic starvation policy. Many of the prisoners who leave tell us that they have lost 15, 20 kilograms of their weight. In addition, of course, to the brutal beating, to this total disregard of Palestinian livelihood. And I think, again, while it's not novel, I think Israel is using this stage, it's using these laws, the state of emergency laws, to break this Palestinian prisoners movement that was and still is a cornerstone of our national struggle for liberation. We are talking about Walid Daqqa, for instance, today. Walid Daqqa is not simply a Palestinian prisoner. He's an activist. He's a writer. His words continue to reverberate across Palestine and actually internationally. And he's teaching us still, even in his death, even in as Israel continues to withhold his body, that our triumph is possible. That the Israeli torture, Israeli racial policies, Israeli genocidal war that continues to be carried out with the support of the United States and other countries, it's not going to break us. It's definitely not going to break us. And these tragic events, even though they are very sad, but I think they are giving us, as Walid has always taught us, they are giving us fuel for our next fight.
No, I think that's an important issue. And finally, I just want to ask you, I mean, we've mentioned it here that, Walid Daqqa was a writer and a prolific writer, but I think, this is one of the aspects of how Israel treats the political prisoners, the dehumanization, the idea that they're just all terrorists, and so many of these human qualities and skills and other elements that are lost in that narrative. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Definitely. I mean, there's a broader policy of dehumanizing any Palestinian prisoner. So the Israeli prison service refers to Palestinian prisoners as security prisoners. This is vis-a-vis Jewish prisoners who are actually granted rights. So Walid Daqqa was denied conjugal visits. He was denied the right to leave to say goodbye to his father before he was killed. He was denied the right to leave on basis of his medical situation, as with other prisoners. But this dehumanization policy presents and treats Palestinian prisoners and Palestinians more broadly as a danger to the Israeli state, and thus permitting any form of violence and torture that they would definitely be subjected to. And Eugene, maybe this is a good way of again circling back to his writings, and just like, if you allow me, just to read a very quick sentence he wrote on his 20th year or 20th anniversary of his captivity. Again, I say prolific writer because his words should be taught and should be read. In this text, he writes, "I write to you from the parallel time. Here, in this parallel time where place is still, we only use your normal time measurement units, like minutes and hours, when our temporal line meet in the prison visitation room. These time measurements units are the only thing that did not change in your time, and we still remember how to use them." And he ends, and this is a very important sentence: "Love is my modest and only victory against my jailer." The Israeli authorities never managed to break his humanity. They never managed to dehumanize him. And I have to say that he was victorious throughout the 13,893 days and minutes and seconds he was in captivity, much like other Palestinian prisoners who continue to struggle against a Nazi regime that tries to withdraw our humanity. But I think our resistance, as in October 7th, has shown, and today, that this is unbreakable. And Walid Daqqa is simply a manifestation of this dream, of this future of liberation that I think would touch not only Palestinians, but others who are oppressed across the globe.
Mm-hmm. Basil Farraj, assistant professor at Birzeit University in Palestine. Thank you so much for joining us once again on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you so much.